Hi, Richard.
Hi there, everybody.
Horace, how are you doing? You got to unmute yourself.
Hello?
How are you doing down there?
All right, how are you?
Philonise, how are you doing?
I'm doing
All right, I'm
fine,
okay.
doing fine now that I know you're on.
Okay.
So just guys, remember that we're on live stream right now, okay?
Okay, I'll
So
mute
please
myself.
mute yourselves, everyone. Okay. So a few of the attendees have joined. I'll give it one more moment before beginning. All right, we're gonna get started. Greetings, my name is Kerry McLean. I'm a member of the steering committee that organized the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence against People of African Descent in the United States. Welcome to all of you who've joined us from different parts of the world for today's press conference. Racist police violence has been a scourge in the United States since the end of slavery. Black people in the United States and our allies have long engaged in struggle to survive and eradicate that violence. In June 2020, following the brutal murder of George Floyd, which has since been witnessed by the world on video, an international coalition of hundreds of organizations and individuals sent a communication to the United Nations Human Rights Council, urging that the UN convene a commission of inquiry to investigate racism and racist police violence in the United States. In an unprecedented move, the African group followed up on that request, requesting an urgent debate on racism at the UN Human Rights Council, and also calling for a commission of inquiry to investigate racism. We learned from our contacts that the US pressured some countries to oppose a commission of inquiry. The Human Rights Council declined the request to convene a commission of inquiry, though it did task the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights with preparing a report on racism. Following the UN's decision to not convene a commission of inquiry, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the National Lawyers Guild, and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers decided to convene a commission of inquiry to conduct the thorough and impartial investigation of police violence in the US that the community had demanded. The Commission of Inquiry's mandate was to investigate the systemic, widespread, and grave violations of the rights of Black people by police in the United States and present its findings and recommendations in a report. We assembled a team of 12 experts, commissioners, none of whom are from the United States, to conduct the investigations in an independent and impartial manner. Our commissioners hail from Jamaica, Antigua and Barbuda, Pakistan, South Africa, Japan, India, Nigeria, France, Costa Rica, and the United Kingdom. We conducted live hearings of 44 cases where the commissioners heard testimony from the family members of victims of police violence, testimony from lawyers who represent the families of victims, and testimony from community activists. The commissioners also reviewed reports, legislation, and other relevant materials. The Commission of Inquiry conducted a thorough investigation into anti-Black violence perpetuated by police in the United States, both historically and in recent times, with an emphasis on evaluating the most recent cases and addressing the connection of the current cases to the history of systemic racism. We concluded our live hearings of cases in February, and our commissioners worked alongside a team of rapporteurs to prepare a report. The report has been shared with the UN High Commissioner and shared with the public at a press conference in the United States. You might have seen news articles about our report in the Guardian newspaper and Newsweek. We hope that our report will be utilized widely and, most importantly, serve as a resource to the community. Today, we present our report to an audience in Southern Africa. 2 of our commissioners will present selected findings and recommendations from the report. We ask for your solidarity and support in advancing the report and seeking implementation of its recommendations. We have several speakers, so let's move forward. I'm honored to introduce Zak Yacoob, former Justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. You're muted, Zak?
Audio now unmuted. Zoom webinar shares.
Right. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everybody, wherever you may be. Thank God I don't have to say good night just yet. Let me say a warm word of welcome to all those who have come to South Africa virtually to enable us to benefit from this conference and the wonderful work that you have done. I've decided to single out 3 people: Kerry McLean, who has already spoken and who has been the driving force behind things; Lennox Hinds, who I'm told has made a huge contribution; and of course, Philonise Floyd, who has really been the lawyer for all the families, and of course, who by the surname indicate precisely what the roots are and what the troubles are. Most importantly, I must welcome the press and impress upon the media the importance of this occasion. It is fundamental to the world. It is fundamental to all the countries who participated in this survey in particular. It is fundamental to the United Nations, fundamental to non-racialism, and fundamental to peace. It is wonderful that these things have been done, and let us hope that through this press conference, the media will make sure that the importance of what has been done is emphasized. Not only that, but future action is of vital importance. I will deal with that in a moment, but the one part of future action has already been touched upon, which is that we must make sure that these recommendations are properly implemented. I have to start by criticizing the United States considerably for exercising pressure on the United Nations, and for expressing my grave disappointment with the United Nations for not passing an appropriate resolution as far as these issues were concerned. It would have been much better if they hadn't. But the fact that, out of all bad things, sometimes come good things. The fact that the United States pressurized the United Nations into accepting a watered-down resolution meant that I could be proud of my fellow lawyers today who engaged in an exercise not for the sake of making money, not for the sake of self-aggrandizement. You'd be surprised to know, media, that lawyers are not only engaged in making money. So they have engaged in this long exercise, which lasted a relatively short time of some months, and produced a clear, calculated, careful, accurate report, not only about what is happening here, but also in relation to the context in the United States, the history, because all of us understand that the history and the context enable us to determine what to do. But there are more important focuses, because while on the one hand, I criticize the United Nations for their resolution, particularly in relation to this matter, they are right in the sense that racism exists everywhere, that killings exist everywhere, and that what we should be doing
I can see the
is
judge.
ensuring that there are steps taken in each of our countries, one by one, not on a broad level, but in each of our countries. Let us not wait for the United Nations. Let us start investigating in our own countries what is happening. And let me talk about that, Africa, and say what we learn. In the first place, we thank the Black Lives Matter campaign. We thank the Floyd family and for Black America, African Black America, and the way in which it has worked to ensure that this commission came about. We take a leaf off their book and in a sense, thank the United States and the United Nations for making it happen. We have drawn attention to some very important things. And coming down to South Africa, racism exists here too. It was because of Black Lives Matter that we were able to focus on our own problems in this country. Here too, I have always espoused the proposition that if there were some 40 odd miners who were killed in an operation in the Marikana mine, which South Africans know about very well. And I make brave to say that those miners would never have been killed had it not been for the fact that they were black. White miners would not have been killed in the way they did. And oddly enough, it was a history of apartheid, that context which gave rise to it. So even though the tools of the implementation of this exercise were Black policemen, we are still hugely influenced by our history. A man died in our country who would have gone unsung as a result of overt police action consequent upon steps taken in connection with the coronavirus. So there is police overaction everywhere. It is a byproduct of colonialism. It needs to be stamped out immediately. There is racism and sexism everywhere, which also needs to be stamped out. And ultimately, let us hope that this investigation leads to many more investigations. I call upon this government, I call upon all the lawyers in our country to take heed of this report and to use this as a springboard, not only to start actions within their own countries, or not only to start action within our own country, but to put into place practical mechanisms to ensure that there is a revolution, a true revolution, which results in the abolition of non-racialism. With those words, let me welcome everybody here once again and thank you for the work that you have done, and say that I am prepared to participate in any further exercise that might come about as a result of what has happened here. Thank you very much indeed to all.
Willy Mutunga has joined the meeting.
Thank you, Justice Yacoob, for those wonderful, thoughtful comments. Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Philonise Floyd, brother of George Floyd. Philonise?
OT, video now stopped.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, you're muted again. Okay, now you're good.
Hi, I'm Philonise Floyd, brother of George Floyd. And you all know what happened to my brother. He was killed by 4 police officers in Minnesota. He was tortured to death for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. That was a modern day lynching in broad daylight. Kids had to see it. Adults had to see it. Not only did they kill my brother, but happened to watch the videos of my brother begging for his life and crying out for his mom has taken a part of me. His children, they are left without a father. Throughout the video, he told police officers at least 12 times, including within the first few seconds, my brother George Floyd clearly stated that I'm going to die. They're going to kill me. He called out for our mom and he said, Mama, mama, my brother also said, tell my kids I love them. And it was devastating watching him in that video panic and cry out for our mom as he was trying to breathe so much that he put his nose into the concrete, trying to create space to just be able to breathe on his right side, because on his left side, his lungs, they were just gone. He couldn't breathe out of them. And he also, if you've seen the video, he shoved his knuckles against the tire, trying to press against the tire just to be able to breathe a little bit. And they weren't allowing him to do that. It was just terrible watching my brother. His knuckles, they were just bleeding everywhere. Blood was just flowing out of him because he was trying his best just to be able to breathe once, to be able to constantly live. I'm here today because I have to be the big brother. I have to look out for his children, but not only his children, America's children. This is why I'm seeking justice for people who have been needlessly killed by two justice systems. They have one for Black America and they have one for white America. And we need equality because we need to be united as one and solidarity. We can stand in solidarity with each other. This feels like a never-ending cycle, like it would never stop, because constantly every day somebody is dying, and they are not being treated with respect. They're not getting treated with support and love and dignity. They're all being treated with police brutality. And this is not something that we need in America right now. Every day you look up, you can see from the Dante Wright family, when I attended their funeral, he was killed 10 miles away from where we were fighting for justice and accountability for my brother. And we all had to go out and speak on that, because we have to stand up for all of these families, because my brother's life, his life mattered. And to teach the world that all lives are precious, I constantly go out and I speak, because my brother would have wanted that, because his life was valuable. He was an asset to our family. He also raised my nephew, who looked up to him as a son, and George treated him like a son, and he was more of a brother to us. We grew up with him. I slept with my brother in the same bed. We ate banana mayonnaise sandwiches together. And I constantly cry every day when I think about him, because we prayed together. We played video games together. We went fishing together. And I don't know how long this is going to go on, but I'm standing with everybody across the world. United Nations, I like you all to know, this is big to me. I love speaking with you all, because I get DMs all across America from people in Switzerland, Germany, Italy, London, Ghana. People text every day, Jamaica, they all say the same thing. You have my condolences, and I know I can't replace your brother, but I stand with you and I'm with your fight because of what's going on today. People put their lives on the line throughout COVID, all for one reason. They said, we're willing to lose our life to stand up for a person's life who was murdered, and they knew it was wrong. People wanted to stand for what was right. And our family, we have been given a life sentence. So the police officers that killed these people and killed their kids and things like that, they have been given a life sentence too. So unfortunately, we have to try our best to get police officers to be accounted on accountability acts. We need them. That's why we're pushing the George Floyd Policing Act, because you have to understand that Eric Garner had a video. He didn't get any justice. You have to understand that Rodney King had a video. he didn't get any justice. You can also point to the guy who I'm in LA right now. And yesterday, we did a rally for him. His name was Anthony McLean. He was so scared of the police, he ran out of his shoes and was shot in the back and was killed. He was handcuffed while he was shot on the ground in the prone position. And it was hard for me to be able to just take it, but I got up and I spoke for him, because all of these people around the world, no matter what color, it doesn't matter the pigment of their skin, we all are united as one. We all are brothers and sisters, and we must stand up and fight for each other. I am Philonise Floyd, and it doesn't matter what this system is doing, it's never going to break my faith. Thank you all so much.
Philonise, thank you so much for your comments. First, I have to say that we deeply appreciate you being here, and we admire how strong you've been throughout all of this, and we're going to continue this fight with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kerry McLean, Mr. Richard Harvey, Max, so many others. I'm trying to go down the line. Thank you all so much. Chris, Charlotte, Mr. Horace, Lennox, Mr. Lennox Hinds, Rashida. Is there anybody else? I think I got everybody, yeah. Thank you all so much.
Okay.
Except me, brother Philonise. This is Willy Mutunga.
Oh, your camera's off, Willy. So
yeah, it's off. Yes, you can't see me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Willy. It's a pleasure to be here. I will continue to fight for justice, because justice is not served until somebody is charged for murder throughout all these cases. And I want to be able to reopen these cases that were put in the back and they swept up under the rug.
Thank you, Philonise.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and actually, that was good timing, Willy. Our next speaker is Willy Mutunga, former Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court of Kenya. Justice Mutunga has been working with us to share our report across Africa. Willy, please.
Thank you, Kerry. Let me say I'm honored that Philonise is in attendance, and I've heard what you said, and I stand in solidarity with him and the Floyd family, in this struggle. I also salute and glorify the work of the commissioners and the rapporteurs and the steering committee that is engaged in this struggle. As a human rights activist and a judge for a long time, I believe what Philonise is saying, that justice is for all, and it's our clarion call. And that struggles for justice are international. We've seen that in the case of, Black Lives Matter, and history records, this anyway. So the rollout of this report to Africa is very, very important, because we need to internationalize the challenges of systemic racism. And as Africans, we understand this 1033 program, which is, in the report, is clear to us. We also struggle against demilitarization. There's a lot of work that is being done against that, in Africa. And I wanted to promise the Floyd family and all of us is that Kenya happens to be a member of the UN Security Council. And as Kenyans, our constitution says very clearly that the Kenya government has delegated power from us, all Kenyans. So we're going to make sure that, that vote in the UN Security Council, the Human Rights Council in the US, that involves the Kenyan government, that it will be our vote. It will be a people-to-people vote, not a state-to-state vote, because we know what happens if we just allow our government to take the position and monitor. It will cave in to the pressures of the US and other governments. So this is our struggle, brother Philonise and your family, and it will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Justice Mutunga. Next is Professor Lennox Hinds, who is the coordinator of the Commission of Inquiry. You're muted, Lennox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the steering committee, permit me to thank and extend our condolences to Philonise Floyd and the Floyd family and all other families of victims who had to relive the pain and horrors of the senseless, unjustified, and illegal executions of their loved ones at the hands of the police here in the United States. The same police who are sworn to serve and protect and instead serve as executioners of our children, of our loved ones. And in all instances, these victims were unarmed, posing no threat or serious bodily harms to the police or any third persons. In the words of one of the witnesses who testified before his commission, the only weapon that these victims had was the color of their skin. We also extend our thanks to and appreciation to our 12 commissioners, 2 of which who are here today, Rashida Manjoo and Max Boqwana. But there were 12 commissioners from Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We thank them for taking time from their busy professional activities to dedicate time to reviewing witness statements, presiding over the hearings, and listening to the heart-wrenching testimonies of these witnesses, and then preparing their findings and report. We thank the 4 rapporteurs, one of whom is here today, Horace Campbell, who helped in the coordination of the testimony of the witnesses during the hearings, introduced the witnesses to the commissioners, and assisted the commissioners in preparing their reports. We also thank our outreach team for who reviewed hundreds of cases of the unjustified killings of Black men, Black women here in the United States. And because of time constraints, we only were able to solicit and present and select 44 of the most egregious cases for our hearings. These cases represent only the tip of the iceberg of the systemic nature of the pandemic of police violence in the United States. The killings that occurred in terms of the presentation, 20 states and 33 cities across the United States. Some of these cities that the commissioners heard the testimonies from, some of these cities were small, some cities were large. We heard testimonies of the variety of ways in which and methods in which the police wantonly and maliciously and intentionally killed unarmed Black men, Black women, and trans and gender non-conforming Black people across the United States. The victims were shot. Some were tortured with tasers. These tasers were produced almost 50,000 volts of electricity into the bodies of these victims. Some were suffocated to death. Some were choked to death. Others were killed when the police used their vehicles as lethal weapons. In all cases, the victims were unarmed. I would be amiss if I did not thank my fellow members of the steering committee who met over the last 11 months in preparing this report. The genesis of this International Commission of Inquiry was inspired by the petition of Paul Robeson and William Patterson, who in 1951 filed a petition at the United Nations, which was entitled "We Charge Genocide, the Crime of the United States Government Against the Negro People." The predecessor of this particular commission that you are now hearing today was the 1978 petition filed by the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, and the United Church of Christ. And that petition was filed with the United Nations in 1978. Then in 1979, the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, in support of that petition, organized a delegation, an international delegation of jurists from Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And they visited prisons throughout the United States. Today, the findings and recommendations of this commission that you are now will be hearing findings and recommendations for was filed with the office of the United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights on March 30th. We are rolling this report out throughout the world. We are rolling today, or this week, and next week, we are rolling the report out in Africa. We've started here in Southern Africa. Day after tomorrow, we will be in East Africa, and next week, we would be in West Africa. The aim is to mobilize the governments who are part of the Human Rights Council, as our chairperson, Ms. McLean, pointed out. And we are hoping that through the Africa Union, that will bring pressure on the countries to condemn the United States and to adopt our resolutions. Now, the United States is going to push back. The United States does not want to be held accountable. The United States thinks that they are above the law, even though they claim that they are a country of laws. But if you look at the history of the United States government wants to be the individuals who pass judgment, but don't want judgment passed on them. And so therefore we are calling upon countries throughout the world to hold the United States accountable before the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lennox. Okay, now we move to selected findings and recommendations from the report. I imagine that you've seen the report, which is available on our website, www.inquirycommission.org. It is a big report. If we attempted to read all of the findings and recommendations at this press conference, we'd be here for a long time. So instead, two of our commissioners will present selected findings and recommendations. And to begin will be Professor Rashida Manjoo, who will present selected findings. Rashida, you ready?
All right. Thank you very much, Kerry, and thank you to all the speakers that preceded me for setting the scene, as well as thanking everyone ranging from the families of victims to the lawyers who participated, to the steering committee, the rapporteurs, the commissioners, etc. It was an honor and a privilege to be part of this process, and all the commissioners, owe a deep sense of gratitude for the supportive team that made it possible that we could come up with a report of this nature. And the hope is that we can give life to the report through these press conferences and encouraging people to take up advocacy and activism. The findings of the commissioners demonstrate a prima facie case of crimes against humanity, thus warranting an investigation by the International Criminal Court, and my colleague Max will expand on this recommendation to the International Criminal Court. 43 of the 44 cases heard by the commissioners resulted in the victims' deaths. The crimes included murder, severe deprivation of physical liberty, torture, persecution of people of African descent, and other inhumane acts which occurred in the context of a widespread or systematic attack directed against the civilian population of people of African descent in the US. The factual findings of the commissioners to establish the existence of widespread and systematic attacks includes the use of force against unarmed people of African descent during traffic and investigatory stops is driven by racial stereotypes and racial biases. US law enforcement agencies routinely target people of African descent based on racist assumptions between Blackness and criminality. Pretextual traffic stops are a common precursor to police killings and use of excessive force against people of African descent. Race-based street stops, otherwise known as stop and frisk, are another form of order maintenance policing that drives racially disparate rates of arrests and often triggers deadly or use of force by the police. Order maintenance policing relies on racialized assumptions about what constitutes disorder and which communities are disorderly. The commissioners found a pattern of police killings of Black people in violation of their US constitutional Fourth Amendment rights to be secure in their persons and houses from unreasonable searches and seizures. In nearly every case that commissioners examined, they found police used excessive force against Black people, all of whom were unarmed or non-threatening. The overall findings of the commission justify the conclusion that people of African descent are subjected to severe deprivation of liberty in the US by the practice of unlawful arbitrary detention and their killings and maiming by police. In every case heard by the commissioners, victims were stopped, detained, or restrained such that they were severely deprived of their liberty. The presence of racial profiling in all cases heard by the commissioners establishes that victims were detained in violation of the international law regarding non-discrimination. The circumstances under which the victims were detained support a finding that law enforcement officials intended to detain the victims. In every case but one, the same targeting that culminated in murder began with a detention. The overall findings of the commissions amount to a prima facie showing that people of African descent are subjected to persecution within the meaning of international law, including as reflected in the Rome Statute that governs the International Criminal Court. The statistics regarding people of African descent being subjected to widespread criminalization, denigration, surveillance, arbitrary arrest, warrantless searches, arbitrary detention, targeting with lethal force, killing and disparate policing establishes that Black people are targeted by reason of their identity. Other specific violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms that the commissioners found: the violation of the right to life. Under international law, the right to life is a fundamental right without which all other rights would have no meaning. And this right shall be protected by law. All of the cases heard by the commissioners in which Black people were killed reflected the arbitrary deprivation of the right to life in violation of international law. The commissioners found a pattern of police killings wherein, regardless of the context of the encounter, The overriding driver of these killings stemmed from and was reflective of systemic racism. The unwarranted use of deadly force reflects a disregard for Black life and the consequences of taking Black life. The commissioners also found a gross violation of the right to proper investigations and accountability, and note that national statistics show that in 2020, only 1% of police killings resulted in officer convictions. Another violation was the right to liberty and security, and the Commission found a pattern of gross violations of the right to security of Black victims of police violence, as well as their families and communities. Specifically, the commissioners found a pattern of police killings of Black people in violation of their right to be free from arbitrary arrest or detention, as well as their right to be free of bodily harm. Another right that was violated is the right to a fair trial and the presumption of innocence. The commissioners found a pattern of state-sanctioned extrajudicial killing of people of African descent by police and a clear pattern of state-sanctioned criminalization of Black people through targeted policing of Black communities as permitted by US law. Specifically, the commissioners found a pattern of pretextual traffic stops and noted that such stops are a common precursor to police killings and use of excessive force against people of African descent. The principle of non-discrimination under international law, the commissioners found a pattern of race-based discrimination in the use of deadly force in violation of the freedom from discrimination. The commissioners noted, based on national statistics, that Black people form 13% of the population, while accounting for 27% of victims of police killings. That is twice the rates of whites. Also, that Black people constitute 35% of the unarmed people killed by police and 36% of people alleged to be unarmed and non-threatening. The disproportionate use of excessive force by police against Black people pervaded the 44 cases examined, and the use of force against unarmed Black people of African descent is driven by racial stereotypes and racial biases. The prohibition against torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. The findings of the Commission are consistent with violations of international prohibitions against torture through the use of tasers, compression, asphyxia, lateral vascular neck restraints and chokeholds, rough rides, and vehicle techniques that caused victims to be chased down in fear of their lives. The police use of restraints resulting in killings where Black victims were choked, suffocated, or crushed over a period of several minutes, often while begging for their lives, amount to severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, and is intentionally inflicted on a person by government actors based on discrimination. The violation of the right to mental health was also an issue that came up in many of the testimonies that we heard. And the commissioners found the police violated the right to mental health of Black people who were experiencing mental health crises. The overwhelming weight of the testimonies before the commissioners was consistent with nationwide data that establishes that the police should not be the first responders for Black people experiencing mental health crises, as police are more likely to approach African American mentally ill persons as criminal subjects rather than as people having health problems. The lack of accountability and the culture of impunity for unjustified killings of Black people are underpinned by structural racism that is embedded in the US legal and policing systems, and I think largely also in society at large. The use of laws such as qualified immunity, the destruction and manipulation of evidence, the cover-ups and obstruction of justice, prosecutorial misconduct and grand jury abuse, the lack of effective oversight of police, including due to the functioning of the internal affairs investigation, are also findings that the commissioners made in this report. In conclusion, the commissioners find that the police killings of people of African descent in the US amounts to human rights violations under international law, and find that a prima facie case of crimes against humanity as reflected in the murder, severe deprivation of liberty, torture, persecution, and inhumane treatment of this population group. Thank you very much for your attention.
Commissioner Manjoo, thank you very much for presenting those selected findings of violations of international law. Now we'll turn to Commissioner Boqwana, Max Boqwana, to present selected recommendations from our report.
Kerry, thank you very much for this opportunity. I just want to honor Professor Lennox Hinds and Advocate Harvey for your undying spirit and never give up attitude. Because I can imagine that on the 30th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations on the 11th of December, 1978, a similar report to the one that we are talking about was submitted. And I think Lennox quite correctly in 1979 labeled that report as an illusion of justice. It is said that almost 45 years later, and more than a quarter of a century after the death of apartheid, justice still remains an illusion for millions of peoples of African descent, in particular in the US and worldwide. We therefore, colleagues, concluded that as a commission, ours is not only to listen, not only to sympathize and pontificate, but to answer the very difficult question, what are we going to do with everything else that we have found? What therefore needs to be done? We noted that our report are twofold in terms of the recommendations. We've got those recommendations that are focused to the US authorities, which we have canvassed in the past month with the international media. And today, we wanted to look at those recommendations that are focused on the role of international community and Africans in the diaspora. Firstly, the recommendations addressed by our commission is addressed to the Human Rights Council and the Office of the High Commissioner. The report calls for on the High Commissioner to support the constitution of UN Human Rights Commission on independent commission of inquiry to the conduct of the police in the United States to fully investigate this subject and assess whether gross violation of human rights and whether crimes under international law have been committed. And secondly, to establish a process to monitor systemic racist police violence in the US by appointing an independent expert on systemic racist police violence in the United States. We also need to make sure that there's a call and a very strong call for the demilitarization of law enforcement throughout the United States. That report should also call for an end to impunity, ensure accountability of police officials, and ensure that those that are resorting to racist violence and unjustified force are brought before independent civilian review boards and also to criminal and civil proceedings. The second recommendation is that the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, on receipt of that report, he or she must institute an investigation into the crimes against humanity as set out in Article 7 of the Rome Statute. We also call on the participant or the state parties to the Rome Statute to initiate an investigation and, where appropriate, a prosecution of US officials for crimes against humanity under the universal jurisdiction. We also call that the US government's executive and legislative branches should acknowledge that transatlantic trade in Africans, enslavement, colonialism and colonialization, and neo-colonialism constitute a crime against humanity and are amongst the major sources and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, Afrophobia, xenophobia, and related intolerances. We therefore say that past injustices and crime against people of African descent must be addressed within the reparatory justice regime. The US government, which is our fifth recommendation, should immediately ratify the core international human rights treaties and regional human rights treaties, and make sure to which US is still need to be a party today. This includes the US ratifying the Rome Statute. Our sixth recommendation is that the important voice of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which declared on the 26th of November 2018 in its report, Police Violence Against Afro-Descendants in the US, they recommended that there must be an implementation of structural reforms in the institutional system of security and justice to counter historical racial discrimination and institutional racism. We also call that there is a need for a collective voice of the African Union member states to make a call to the Human Rights Council not to sidetrack world attention or to minimize or excuse concerns of people of African descent in the US, and endorse and call loudly for support, lobby, and argue for the creation of the Independent Commission of Inquiry as demanded by our report. We make these recommendations, Chair, because the United States of America is a very serious global player on matters of international law and human rights, and in fact, portrays itself as a paragon of human rights and democracy. It must therefore act according to its outlook, failing which impunity becomes the order of the day world over. Once again, thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity you have given us. And we hope that with this small act of our report, the blood of those who have perished in the hands of those that are supposed to be protecting them, represented here today by my brother Philonise, shall not be in vain. And this step we are taking will avoid and prevent more similar incidences from taking place in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Boqwana. Thank you. Okay, we're going to open the conversation now to members of the press that have questions. And I see that 2 people already have their hands raised. So I'll begin with Siboniso Ngandi.
But before you do that, my name is Philonise. Everybody keeps saying Philonise, Philonise.
Philonise,
Philonise.
Okay. Siboniso? You have to unmute yourself. Let's see. Can you unmute yourself, Siboniso? Okay, so I'm going to move to the next person until Siboniso sorted that out. Kumi Nadu. Just unmute yourself and you can ask a question. Hmm. Okay, I'm not sure what the issue is because you both just need to unmute yourselves because you have permission to talk now. Maybe they've stepped away from the computer. Yes, possibly they did. All right, so are there any other questions or comments? And you may, people may speak or you may type them into the chat. Okay, so any comments from the commissioners or anyone else? I'm not sure what's going on with the two that have their hands raised.
Kerry, can Charlotte check whether it's a problem on?
Yes, she and I are talking about it. So there doesn't seem to be a problem on as far as Zoom. So we're thinking that maybe they just stepped away from their computers because their hands were actually raised for like 30 minutes. So they probably raised their hands and they moved away from the computer. Okay, all right. So here's a question in the chat. All right, the person, this Pusuletso Saul thanks the commissioners and asks, is the report available online? Yes, it is. Please visit, I'll type it into the chat, www.inquirycommission.org. And you'll be able to read or download the report there. It's currently available in English, but we are going to be making it available in Spanish and French. And the other question is, when do the commissioners intend on engaging with the African Union? Well, let's see, I'm going to actually call on Lennox Hinds to answer that question. You're muted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am actually going to defer to Dr. Willy Mutunga because he is responsible for the rollout on the African continent. And you know that the African Union is headquartered in Addis. And he is in Kenya. And so if Dr. Mutunga is available and hearing us, I would like him to share his thinking in terms of a timetable for us to make a presentation to the AU.
Lennox, I think after the East African rollout and the West African one, that's when we can discuss, the timelines. At the moment, we haven't set up a schedule for that because it has to be discussed by the committee. But the idea is after the 3 rollouts, we can then discuss that. We're also thinking of how Africa can come to New York, during the course of this year, but nothing concrete. That will be my answer. We haven't set up dates, but we will definitely engage them.
Okay, just following up on what Dr. Mutunga just said. We have a rollout in East Africa, which is scheduled for this Thursday, the 20th. Then on the 26th of this month, we have the West African rollout, which is going to take place from Lagos, but there will be other countries in the West African region who will participate. Now, mind you, that is on the 26th. Somewhere around the first week of June, we will have a rollout in Geneva. The High Commissioner is scheduled to give her report on what her findings are, which we submitted our report to her back in March 30th. But she is scheduled to give her report somewhere around the 4th week of June. And the Human Rights Council will be meeting at that time. We are going to time our organizing efforts towards the Africa Union sometime between, as Dr. Mutunga has indicated, between the 26th of this month and perhaps the first or second week of June, so that we can build up the mobilizing effort and the lobbying effort aimed at the Human Rights Council.
All right. Let me see. It looks like Siboniso.
Kerry, you have to answer one question.
Mhm.
What has been the reception of the report in the US?
In the US.
Yes.
Okay, and so your question was the various bodies engaged. So to answer about the various bodies engaged, thus far, we've really just been communicating with the High Commissioner's office, and that exchange has been collegial. You know, they've welcomed our input for whatever that's worth, right? And we plan on engaging with key politicians in the US, but that's still in process. Now, as far as the general Black community in the United States, the report has been very warmly received. And a couple of groups have talked with us already about how they want to utilize it in some of their work. Okay. All right, so
just following up on what the chair has said. The steering committee has now been organizing, planning webinars or really briefing sessions for the movement for Black Lives. And so that we would have a schedule for that within perhaps the next week to 10 days. We intend to present the findings and for the movement to take this report into their own hands and decide what of the recommendations and findings that they will be taking to the streets in the United States as they mobilize. We are also planning, as Kerry has said when she talks about specific politicians, the Congressional Black Caucus. We are reaching out to some of the key members of the caucus to prepare a briefing for them so that they can take a look at the recommendations and the findings and decide how they want to utilize that as they deal with legislation coming from the US Congress. And finally, the Biden administration has not been standing still. They have anticipated our report and have prepared their own response to it, in which, of course, they try to deflect one way or the other, and we are going to be preparing a response to that. But in the interim, we are going to try to get a briefing with them to lay out our position and called for them adopting some of the recommendations, and finally exposing their hypocrisy as it unfolds.
Okay, thanks, Lennox. All right, Siboniso, would you like to ask your question now?
No, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm sorry for my for arriving late, but no, it's quite interesting that the report has been, released. My question, I think, has been covered, because I just wanted to check how the U.S. authorities have received the report, and is there any commitment that they've pledged, to take some action, to implement those findings, those recommendations from the report? That's what actually I wanted to find out.
Okay. All right, I think Lennox just responded to that. I don't know if he has anything to add.
No, I may add later on.
Okay, thank you. All
Kerry,
right.
perhaps if I can, because I've been raising my hand, but I realize I'm Max Boqwana and there's a lot of us. So it's Pusele, it's Saudi here. I just want to ask, the commissioners, thank you very much again. What do they mean when they talk about independent civilian review boards? And what do those look like practically? What do they do? What will they do? And so forth. How many per community, per state? And that, yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Did everyone get the question?
Oh.
Okay, could you repeat it again, please, a little louder?
So
your
on
voice
the
is very low.
recommendations, no problem, Kerry. Can you hear me? So on the recommendations, Commissioner Max Boqwana referred to independent civilian review boards. So I'd like him to expand on that. What do they look like? What do they do? And so forth. Thank you.
Okay, Max, do you want to begin, or I don't know if Lennox, you'd like to chime in as well?
Yeah, yes, I can begin, and Lennox can finalize that. Now, Busaletso, there's a strange thing in the US that the police are acting with indemnity, whether it's criminal prosecution or civil prosecution. And there's a very strong police unions that will make sure that nothing ever happens to the police. That's the same, that's why you have this level of impunity in terms of their behavior. Now, if you do a parallel structure, you look at South Africa, you've got something called IPID, so the Independent Police Directorate, which is essentially looking at the police behavior. It becomes an immediate environment of complaint when it comes to police. And that's a similar structure that we are recommending. But we think in the case of the United States, that structure must also constitute members of the community, in particular the Black community, because that becomes the first layer of accountability when it comes to the police, even before you deal with the criminal complaints and the civil procedures. So it's a similar structure to IPID in South Africa, which is a structure that should not be costly to those who think they have been offended by the behavior of the police. And I think it's important, therefore, in this sense of accountability and also the community participation.
Thank you, Max. Lennox, would you like to add anything?
Well, I didn't hear the question, but I heard Max's response. And based upon Max's response, I am deducing what the question is.
It
The
was regarding
question of,
independent civil review boards.
well,
It
Kerry,
was
what?
regarding independent civil review boards.
Oh, yes,
Civil
okay.
review boards. Mhm.
The issue here in the United States, as in many other countries, but dealing within the United States, the police are the only civil servants who are authorized by statute and law to be able to use force, including deadly force on other citizens, to force them to comply. And so therefore, they have to be accountable. They have to be accountable to the community that they presumably are authorized to protect and serve. And that accountability means that the community itself in which they operate have to be able to discipline them, including recommending that they be prosecuted or that they be fired from their jobs based upon dereliction of their duties and responsibilities. The police have fought back, and they fight back within the organized trade union movement. That is, they have organized themselves. The business community supports them, and the local politicians support them. And so therefore, we have this dynamic of the business community, the politicians, the trade unions, all setting up shields for the police, and which results in them having impunity. We are calling for accountability to the community. That is an oversight structure that has the power, subpoena power, to call witnesses, to demand the background and the records of the police, the historical employment records, and their records while as police officers. And that is the battle, because we believe that as the police realize that they cannot operate with impunity, conduct will change.
Thank you, Lennox, for adding that portion. So there's a question in the chat from Ambassador Milo. I don't know if that's correct, but the question is, how much impact has the Commission of Inquiry on George Floyd had on the Commission's final product? So I guess you're asking how much impact the George Floyd case had on our final product. I'm going to let the two commissioners answer that. How much did the George Floyd case impact our report? Max and Rashida, please.
Rashida will answer that.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, Kerry. I think it would be a disservice to say that the George Floyd case overwhelmingly impacted the report, because then we're doing a disservice to the other 43 cases that we had, and all the other research and information that we have. I think what the George Floyd case did was put it in the public domain in such a way that it appealed to the humanity and the dignity of people, and it was a sort of never again moment, because it was so visceral, it was so out there, the recording, and including using the recordings in court. So I think the visceral effect and the activism and advocacy around it is huge, and it's going to keep this issue alive. But it's not just because, and the report of course, is referring to all 44 cases, because each life that was taken was just as important to us. Each family that was dehumanized, each family whose dignity was violated, the loss that they've suffered was important to the commissioners. So it's an overall picture, but I think the visceral images and the use of social media these days has helped to give life to this constant dehumanizing and violations that are experienced by people of African descent in the US. Thank you.
Rashida, that was so beautifully expressed. Perfect, thank you. Would you like to add anything, Max?
No. I think Rashida is correct. I think to Ambassador Milo, one of the clearest thing, which is actually quite sad, is this idea of blackness being equated to criminality. And you have noticed, and it has touched South Africa now, that on the week we released the report, that was the week in which Lindani Myeni was also killed in the similar circumstances to a number of these 44 cases that we were looking at. And it's quite clear that the idea of racial profiling, it's at the center of all of these things. And in the end, to political people like Lennox, it depicts the United States to being a real settler colonial state that is thriving on otherizing and also on exclusion. You've got this idea that the peoples of African descent are still not part of the American community. And that's why this idea of dehumanizing and killing with impunity is there. But I think what then the George Floyd case has done through the social media, through the manner in which it was so disgusting, it has brought to the fore all of the other 44 cases, which were as cruel and even more cruel than the case of George Floyd in some instances. That's why we came to the conclusion that the report that we have produced, it will be a living report because it must stay in the conscience of those that are in authority.
That was an excellent analysis, Max. Thank you. All right, are there any?
Hello, Kerry, can you hear me?
Yes, who's that?
I might appear as Max, but my name is Stanley. I'm with the SADC Lawyers Association, and I just wanted to add my voice before you bring this to an end, to say thank you very much. And I'm inspired by the idea that this report should be living, and this is where my contribution comes from. We have had the Southern African version, and we're going to have the session in West up until the rest of the regions. And I thought that one of the more important things is to ask the Commission what measures you have in place, what program rollout you intend to have, so that we can keep this a living document. A lot of the people still need to hear this, and I want to know if there are any ideas or strategies around making sure that we have a bottom-top introduction of this report, so that there is ownership from the grassroots communities from Southern Africa, even where I'm talking from, and they should be able in future events to be the ones presenting their sentiments on your findings that you have made today in different international fora, so that we can make sure that the consciousness keeps going up. So that's the question. But also just an observation, Kerry, if we could hopefully have the recording of this and maybe turn it into a podcast. I'm having quite a number of my members saying the link was not able to come live as they were trying to log on, and I had to come in as Max, as you can see. But I think there's still ample opportunity to redistribute it, this presentation to members in the Southern African region, and maybe as a suggestion, open up the next edition in East or West Africa to some of our members as well, because I think they would still value the content.
Thank you so much, Anthony. You asked some really important questions. So regarding this press conference, Yes, it's going to be available for people to view afterwards. You can go directly to our website, www.inquirycommission.org. The link is in the chat, and you'll be able to access it probably sometime later today. And we are also going to have it available on YouTube or via our Facebook page, Commission of Inquiry. And about the podcast, I can't answer that right now, but we'll look into that. But for sure, you'll be able to view this press conference again. And like I said, probably within a couple of hours. Okay.
Kerry,
and
Let me just say this to the brother who just spoke. We welcome you taking and adopting our report as your own. We have no pride of ownership here. Take it, use it as you deem fit as we mobilize. The report, take portions of it, any portions that you deem appropriate or useful, and highlight it. The objective of having the rollouts is to mobilize the communities throughout Africa. And as I said before, Dr. Willy Mutunga, headquartered in Nairobi, is responsible for this overall mobilization on the African continent. And I think that we'll somehow, my colleagues who are more media and internet savvy than I am can give you the contact information for Dr. Willy Mutunga so you could communicate directly with him.
Okay, so
Zak wants to say something.
Hang on 1 second, please. Justice Yacoob actually started to say something when Lennox started speaking. So please, Justice Yacoob.
Yeah, sorry, this is Zak here. I just wanted to say goodbye and say that I'm very proud of this exercise. Thank you for enabling me to participate. And I know that it must have been an emotionally horrible process for many of you, but I hope it was enriching too. Thank you very much indeed. And I just thought I would say something before I said goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Justice
much.
Yacoob.
Thanks,
Thank
Zak.
you for joining us. Okay, so Max, we're going to say something?
No, I wanted to point you to Zak.
Okay. All right.
Kerry, can I ask our American colleagues, is there a benefit to having a formal national human rights institution that has a focus on police brutality, submits reports to the legislature, submits reports to the UN? Is this something that would work in the US?
So I don't know if anyone else wants to answer, but I'm going to answer that in part. So
Okay,
the civil society organizations have been pushing for years for the US to establish a national human rights institution. It comes up pretty much with every UPR, Universal Periodic Review Report, and all of these other governments recommended to the US, but so far nothing has happened on that end, but it's something that we'll continue to push for. I think it has a lot of value. And I mean, obviously we would want police violence to be one of the focuses, but it's that type of institution is important for a lot of reasons. Does anyone want to add to that? Lennox, Horace?
I defer to Kerry on this.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, let's see. Are there any other questions?
Kerry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. No. I just wanted to ask, have these recommendations been structured, or by the way, have these recommendations been structured so as to be short-term, medium, and long-term goals, or are they just are the commissioners and anyone else involved just going at it? Because, I mean, for example, the Rome Statute issue, the US was once party to it. So what's the likelihood that it's going to enter into that? And does that then indicate a failure or success of the commission and its recommendations? So I think structuring it in that sense would assist. I hope there's a question in there somewhere.
So, okay, I don't know how much opportunity you've had to review the recommendations, but the way that we structured it for the report was to different entities. I'm sure you noticed that. And no, they weren't structured in terms of short and long-term goals. And, regarding the ICC, and I'll, Lennox, you can chime in after that. Yeah, we are aware of the challenges concerning that, right? And as with many other things, it's just going to be a struggle. It's something that we push for. And we don't know when precisely we'll realize our goals, but it's something that we're going to push for. Lennox, would you like to add anything?
I could add something.
Horace, please.
Yes, to the person who asked the question, I think one of the things that we should not underestimate is the extent to which, in the short and immediate term, this document is strengthening the families of those who have been killed by the police. That is, immediately, one of the things that this report is doing is to ensure that the families are not silenced. We heard from one family member. All across this country, our report is playing the role of emboldening and strengthening the families. So this is something that is short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Secondly, apart from the international human rights angle, inside the United States of America, there are ongoing struggles to defund the police and to divert resources to the needs of human beings. And there are laws before the books in the United States, such as the George Floyd Policing Act, that in the medium term, these are struggles that are going on. So I think that the rollout today in Africa is to present the African solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the United States of America. But this is one part of a global struggle. That is, the struggles on the human rights front, the Human Rights Council is one aspect. There is a struggle with the United States Congress, with the executive of the United States, but we should not forget the families, because our report is not to silence the families. Our report is to strengthen the families and to make sure their voices and their trauma is addressed by this government so that the question of systemic racist violence is addressed. And to Stanley from SADC, I wanted to add that one of the things that can be done in the SADC region is that if you could find resources to bring all the law schools together in the Southern Africa region to have a 2-day discussion on how the law schools can teach the questions that came out of this report so that it is internationalized and the lawyers who are being trained in South Africa would be understanding what their role would be to support their brothers and sisters in other parts of the African world.
Horace, thank you. That was an excellent contribution, and I did not introduce you earlier. This is Professor Horace Campbell, who's a global peace activist and Pan-Africanist, and who is participating in rolling out this report across Africa. I want to mention a couple of things from the chat. So Willy Mutunga, he's shared his contact information. I'm posting it right now in the chat for all to see, if you'd like to reach out to Willy. And also, just to be clear, for the upcoming African press conferences, one is in 2 days for East Africa, and then the next is next Wednesday for West Africa. Please feel free to attend. So for the Zoom, we want to limit it to the press, just so that the press has an opportunity to really question the people who are presenting at the press conference. But there is a live stream, a link to watch on the Facebook live stream, okay? And anyone can view that. And we'll be, Charlotte, if we have that link, we can share that with people right now, but we'll be advertising it as well, okay, over the next couple of days. All right, there it is. There's the link for the live stream. You'll be able to view the East African and West African press conferences via that live stream. Okay. All right, is there anything else? Okay, let's see. Oh, Krish just wrote a comment thanking us all for this historic program of action. That is the continuation of a long journey for justice for the oppressed and everywhere in the world. It's both symbolic and actionable. Our strength and solidarity goes to the Floyd family, and strength to Philonise for his valiant efforts in promoting this program. Aluta continua. Great work to Max, Rashida, Zak for Southern Africa. Viva all, viva. Thank you so much, Krish. What a great message. Okay, wow, it's a great way to actually wrap things up, unless there's another question. All right, so thank you all for joining this press conference. You've heard from a family member of a victim of racist police violence. You've heard from respected African jurists who endorse our report. You've heard two of our commissioners present some of the findings of egregious violations of international law and heard recommendations for fighting racist police violence in the United States. We ask the press in South Africa to share this information widely and to share our call for solidarity. Please be in touch if you need additional information or would like to conduct interviews. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you, Kerry.
Thanks, Lennox and colleagues.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, team. Wonderful. Bye.